All right, let's bring this meeting, did that scare you, Jim? Yeah. Let's bring this meeting to order and let Jim lead us in the flag salute.
Please join me.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much, Jim. Now I'll entertain approval of action minutes for January 24th, 2018.
Roll call.
Oh, that part.
Baker. Broadway. Here. Harvey. Here. Holmes.
Here.
Nader. Powers.
Here.
Rohan.
Here.
Trebus.
Okay, now I'll entertain.
I said, I know. I'm sorry.
You don't need me.
We love you, man.
Hi, how are you? Good morning.
Okay. So Kirk is here. I'll entertain a motion for approval of the action minutes, January 24, 2018.
Move approval.
Moved in second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Seeing none? Approval follows. Okay. Agenda review.
Looks pretty good.
Looks good, everyone's
Then
fine.
again, I'm
no-
not here. What the hell do I?
Anyone? Everyone's fine with the agenda as it sits? Okay. So now, this is a time for public comment. Does anyone out in the audience have any public comment at this time? Seeing none, we'll go to the consent calendar, and these items are expected to be routine and non-controversial. And that's all I'm going to say because I'm losing my voice, so. So any questions about the consent calendar? I'll entertain a motion to approve. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? None? Action carries. All right, Celia. Item G, unmet transit needs.
I'm going to hand that over to Aaron Hoyt.
Thank you very much, Celia. So I will be taking this item this morning. And before we get started with the approvals, this is an action item. I wanted to go through a little bit of background on the unmet transit needs process, what it is, what did we do this year, what did we hear from the participants from the unmet transit needs outreach process, and what are the final recommendations that we're bringing to you for approval today. So as a regional transportation planning agency, one of our core activities is managing the Transportation Development Act. You just approved an item a few minutes, or maybe less than a minute ago, for the approvals of the preliminary fiscal year 2018-19 Local Transportation Fund and State Transit Assistance Fund. The total is about $26 million, all coming from the Transportation Development Act. So these funds are used for transit and transportation purposes, and the unmet transit needs is one of the components and requirements of the Transportation Development Act. This process is an outreach-driven effort. It provides valuable feedback to our transit operators in the cities on individuals' uses and perception of how transit works here in Placer County. It also focuses on the absence of transit services in areas of our communities. It's also a mechanism to implement the short-range transit plans that we are currently updating. And it provides direct feedback to everyone participating in the process. While not every comment that we receive through this process results in an unmet transit need that is reasonable to meet, there are a number of programmatic and project-specific improvements that have been made throughout the county over the last 10 years, and even longer than that, but all I had was 10 years worth of room on the slide. Programmatic improvements are things such as a Health Express, a non-emergency medical trip program that's offered countywide, the call center, the bus pass subsidy program, and more project-specific improvements are the Taylor Road Shuttle that was implemented back in 2009, year-round service on Highway 267. There's a collaboration between the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, ourselves, and the Nevada County Transportation Commission. And aside from programmatic and project-specific improvements, we've also pursued grant funding and have been awarded funding to do studies such as the Rockland Community Transit Study and the Rural Counties Transit Study. This year's outreach efforts, we paired up with the short-range transit plan update that David Melko is leading for our agency. And with this, we worked on a single message to get out on transit. We have two different planning efforts that are similar, but have different questions that they're asking and different end results. And so we want to make sure there's no confusion. So in doing so, we leveraged some additional resources to improve our social media and outreach efforts through email campaigns. We worked with our local agencies through the e-news that's released from the cities, worked with our public sector partners, as well as working with our nonprofits and social service agencies to really get the word out about questions and surveys that we're offering through this process. And realizing that no single method is effective or solely effective in this day and age of technology, we had to try all different avenues to really get the word out. In doing so, we also relied on the tried and true newspaper ad. I heard when I was in Tahoe, I think the first year I did this process, was that if it's not in the newspaper, it's not happening. So we continue to run newspaper ads. We ran 7 of them a week before each of the public meetings that we held here in the region. And the ads served the purpose of highlighting the upcoming meetings, but also how individuals could participate in the unmet transit needs process. With our enhanced social media and email outreach efforts, we had 174 individuals participate in the process this year. That is up from the past. The bulk of those participants participated in the online survey that we had. In equal amounts either emailed in hard copies of the survey or attended a workshop. The survey asked individuals on whether they ride public transit, how often do they ride it, which transit service do they use, and for the purpose of unmet transit needs report, they were asked, are there certain areas that you cannot get to and why? It generated 141 comments through the process, which was a 53% increase in comments that we received over the past year. So a little bit of effort did allow us to get quite a bit more input than we had received in the past. So it was a great bang for the buck investment. And that information that we also gathered through this process helps out our short-range transit plan and has developed a group of interested individuals to participate in our email database on that. Just a quick breakdown of the comments that we received. They were generally equally distributed between other requests. Those are we should have a bus shelter instead of a bus stop sign. We should allow individuals to purchase fare media bus passes in different methods or different locations that we currently do. So more operational type responses. And then also service schedule, a service area, and new service areas were some of our larger categories of comments that we received. Now these generally fluctuate every year, so this is a snapshot over the last year of how the comments broke down. To talk about the comments in general, we're not going to go through all 141, but I wanted to break it down into kind of larger themes. What are some of the reoccurring comments that we saw and heard? Commuter bus service, this is kind of a mainstay through the unmet transit needs process. There's a large contingent of individuals who ride the one of 14 commuter buses daily down to Sacramento. It's an engaged population, and they participate in this process quite regularly, looking for, with the state departments moving to different locations out of downtown Sacramento, there's a lot of interest for that. Stops at different locations in downtown that those 14 bus routes don't currently serve. Also, there's interest in expanded weekend and Sunday services on Placer County Transit in Roseville, reoccurring challenges with scheduling dial ride trips, expanding to new areas, newly developing areas that is, and availability of rural transit services outside of our standard 3/4 mile buffer and even beyond a 1 mile buffer that the Placer County Rural Transit Study looked into. Also through this process, we going through the comments and discussing with our partner agencies, we were working with the City of Lincoln. City of Lincoln had looked at their dial ride ridership in the past, and identified there were some capacity constraints, and so they've elected to add 50 additional minutes per day of service on their dial ride that coincides with the school tripper bus services during the school year. So they've added that. We've also will be participating with the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency on a advisory committee looking at social service needs and transportation in the Tahoe Basin, kind of the resort area that gets into the Placer County planning boundary. That's essentially the where the resorts are. So with that, each of the comments that we receive, it's a multi-tiered test that we put them through. We look at the adopted definitions for the unmet transit need and reasonable to meet. We look at, can that comment be addressed by the existing transit services or programs that are out there today? Often we find that there are services or programs that can get those individuals to where they need to go via transit. It's just an understanding and awareness of what programs and services are offered in Placer County. And then the Social Services Transportation Advisory Committee reviews, analyzes, and recommends findings that are part of this report. So the recommendations today, as outlined in your staff memo, is, and this was recommended by the Social Services Transportation Advisory Committee, is to evaluate the potential for a transportation network and or microtransit companies along with a mobile ride match technologies to supplement or replace general public dial ride. So what this is getting at is we have a set of programs and services in place in Placer County and throughout the nation and within the state and our local areas within Sacramento. Transit agencies and cities are trying to take advantage of the public sector, what they have to offer through Uber or through Lyft or through some newer technologies that are out there that are doing ride pooling. And so the Social Services Transportation Advisory Committee wanted to look at, could this be replicated in Placer County? There are a few pilot tests going on in the Sacramento area right now. And through our short-range transit plans, the intent is to look at this as a possibility, look through the challenges and feasibility of it, and then recommend a pilot program to actually test the viability of such a partnership to either supplement dial ride services or replace it. In the end, what the goal is to either improve services, and or reduce the cost of services that are out there. So this is something that's occurring throughout, as I mentioned earlier, and the SSTAC, which is the acronym, thought this would be wise investment time to look into. And with that would come the adoption of the resolution 1805 that indicates that there are no new unmet transit needs that are reasonable to meet for implementation in fiscal year 2018-19, and that the unmet transit needs and analysis and recommendations final report is accepted and complete. With that, I will gladly take any questions that you may have.
Anyone? Questions from the audience? So come on.
Good morning, I'm Tink Miller. Pardon me, I'm Executive Director of Placer Independent Resource Services here in Auburn. We serve people with disabilities of any age and any type of disability. However, the majority are in fact seniors. I also facilitate the monthly meetings of the Best Step Transportation Collaborative, in which the transit operators and people from social service organizations like mine and members of the public can drop in. It's an unofficial meeting, but they can drop in and talk face-to-face with people who operate transit services and talk about their needs and get an understanding of how transit works. So, and I am a member of the Social Services Transportation Advisory Committee. So I specifically want to comment on the recommendation that we made from the SSTAC on the last point that Aaron was addressing. Sorry. Because there is an ongoing issue around accessibility for people with disabilities in the Uber and Lyft types of services. Privately owned vehicles typically are not accessible for someone that uses a wheelchair or maybe has an oxygen tank that they're traveling with. And so there has to be some kind of supplemental service maintained that will ensure equal access to transportation for people who would not be able to use one of those services. And I recently became aware of a new pilot that's just being launched in Clark County, Nevada, which is Las Vegas, where they have entered into a contract with Lyft, and it's actually the 5th model that Lyft is launching in 5 different major cities around the country, so there'll be 5 different versions. But it caught my eye because of the potential for cost savings and how they're addressing access. The passenger will pay the same fare to use the Lyft service as they would pay to use the Dial-A-Ride in that county. And the additional cost of the ride, which they calculated $18, will be paid by the public transit dollars. And the county will continue to maintain its paratransit services for service for people who could not use a Lyft type of vehicle. So that's their version in this pilot project of how to maintain access to transportation. So I just wanted to go on record why I am supporting this proposal, because there are lawsuits around the country against Lyft and Uber because of the access issues. And in my role as director of an organization serving people with disabilities, it could be controversial. So I just wanted to explain why I support this. And I do recommend you approve the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Tink. Any other? I was going to sort of ask what Tink was asking. Are there programs out there that are working with Lyft and Uber? Because I see that as our future, but it sounds like things will bring themselves about. And they're giving community, so maybe they might put funds towards helping with transportation in the future.
At this point, they're primarily pilot programs,
Right.
and so we can learn from their successes as well as their challenges so that we don't have to make those same mistakes.
Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, so,
Just quickly, Madam Chair, on the issue, though, of the accessibility and utilizing an Uber or Lyft, when you're looking at a pilot, like in Clark County, realize that Clark County has over 2 million people. Las Vegas itself is over 600,000 people, and so whereas they might be able to equip vehicles down there that they can keep busy just by virtue of the population, you might not have that same success at a more.
Absolutely correct.
Right.
And that's part of the lessons that we need to gain from those experiences and apply those to really rural and suburban
Yeah.
issues.
thanks, Kirk. Seeing no other questions, that is an action item, so
So moved.
it's been moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Seeing none, motion carries. Item number H.
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the board, this is my item on state legislative issues, and there are 2 primary issues that we'll be addressing this morning. The first is probably nearer and dearer to our hearts, and that is the issue of the districting of the county. As we all know, Measure M in 2016 came just shy of passing, and as a result, the board directed us to look at the possibility of districting the county to put in a transportation sales tax in the areas where there is support and there is need for that. We've been working with Mark Watts, our state legislative advocate, on this. We were able to join on to a bill that was introduced by a San Diego area legislator. He has since dropped the bill, and so it is dead for this session. So that's the bad news, but we are regrouping. There is still opportunity to move forward in 2019 and still have a districting bill completed and be able to place a transportation sales tax for a designated district on the ballot in 2020. So we still have time. And with that, I'd like to introduce Mark Watts, who's going to talk a little bit more about the strategy that we're pursuing going forward.
Hi, good morning. First and foremost, I think the good news coming out of all this is that even though when we joined in the bill last year with Assemblymember Gloria's measure, AB 1324, they had language in there that proved to be frail, and we were able to work, since he put the bill over till January, we were able to work closely with the Assembly Local Government Committee and Mr. Gloria's staff, and we put a lot of time and effort into this, and we came up with actually improved language. And they were preparing to amend the bill after the bill came out of Assembly Local Government when, because of local politics, he decided to drop the bill. What they did, out of respect for the effort that Celia and your team here put together, was they went to council and had language drafted that just deals with the issue going forward that we want to see put into a bill next year. So that was a very nice gesture on their part. I'm not sure what he's going to do next year, but I think it's up to us, and this is where it leads to the strategy, up to us to put together a coalition. And I know your director is working hard at contacting other counties, put together a coalition that want the same goals met. Make sure the language meets their needs, because there are several different places in the Public Utilities Code where you can be designated as a transportation planning agency. We happen to pick the one that designated Placer County in the language that we have. So there may be some give and take as we move forward putting the coalition together. And once we've got that critical mass, 3 or 4 or 5 counties, or it doesn't even have to be that big, but as long as we've got a mass, several other counties ready to move forward, by the fall, we'll be able to reintroduce legislation next year, select an author from one of the counties that's involved in the coalition, and get moving. And again, just to harken back, we did work with the local government committee consultant on this language, so if we start off with an assembly committee or assembly bill, we'll be working with in a positive environment as we move forward. So we're in the best position we can be going forward now. It was a disappointment when he had to walk away from his measure for local issues, but we're now taking care of our own selves in our own approach. So I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you. Kirk, do you have questions?
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
From the last one.
Any other questions? Any questions from the audience? Okay, thanks.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
Mark.
Okay, and I also wanted to I've talked to the chair about this, but let the other board members know that because this bill has been delayed and, the districting is not in place, we've put TBWB, our consultants, on hiatus until, so a savings of $8,000 a month until we have this districting secured, because there's no sense in moving forward with a transportation sales tax if we don't know if we can put it on the ballot. So I did want to let you know about that. The other item that is before the board is a position on Proposition 69. And this is going to be on the June ballot and statewide ballot. And it requires that all revenues, essentially from SB1, the gas tax registration fee that was put in place by the legislature last year, that it guarantees all of that money going to transportation. To a large extent, some of the loopholes that it's trying to plug are somewhat perceived loopholes, but it's sort of dotting the I and crossing the T on some of the details. It specifically says that the money from SB1 cannot go to pay general obligation bonds, and what this refers to is back in 2006, there was a $19.9 billion transportation bond, general obligation bond, and over the years there have been questions about whether transportation money would go to pay that general obligation bond, but a general obligation bond is for the general fund of the state, and so this clarifies that. And it also removes the limitation on being able to continuously appropriate the transportation money through the GAN limit, and so it assures that the money keeps flowing to transportation and only to transportation. So with that, staff is recommending a position of support on Proposition 69, as well as your feedback on the strategy for working on the transportation sales tax district. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions?
I support both.
Any from the audience? Seeing none, I'll bring it back. So you want a motion for Prop 69?
That is correct.
I move that we adopt a position of support for Prop 69.
Second.
So we have a first and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Seeing none, motion carries. Item number I, overall work program.
Yes, this is the final amendment of this year's budget, and it doesn't reflect a whole lot of difference in terms of the work program, but what it does reflect is the implementation of the updated staffing plan that this board adopted back in October. It, of course, balances. I do want to note that it does not include the savings from the hiatus of the TBWB contract, so I do expect that we'll be seeing an increase in our carryover for next year, because that is going to be a savings. But even without that, the budget balances, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Seeing none, I'll ask the audience, any questions? Seeing none? Been moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, none, motion carries. Item number J, preliminary draft.
Good morning, Chair Powers and members of the board. I'll be handling this item. You actually have a second document, and this is the preliminary draft work program for next year, and we need to submit this to Caltrans by March 1st of each year. You'll see that the work program gives you an overview of our planned staff activities and the budget. And this is a preliminary draft, and so we're releasing it for review, and then we'll be coming back to the board in May for final adoption of the work program. So there's a number of items that we'll be completing this fiscal year, including 2 short-range transit plans and also the environmental document for the Highway 65 widening project. And then going into next fiscal year, there are several project implementation activities that we'll be continuing, including the Highway 65 widening Phase 1 design, the I-80 auxiliary lanes design, and also the State Route 49 sidewalk gap closure project environmental and design. We'll also be continuing our update to the regional transportation plan for 2020, and we'll also be completing the Dry Creek West planning and feasibility study that we've been working on with the city of Roseville and Placer County. And of course, near and dear to my heart is we'll be overseeing and working with Caltrans on Phase 1 construction of the Interstate 80 State Route 65 interchange and making sure that project stays on schedule and within budget. You just heard the update on the state advocacy, and so we'll be continuing our regional funding strategy and looking at exploring options and doing additional polling and outreach as part of that. In addition to all these specific projects that I've mentioned, we of course have our core agency activities, the Transportation Development Act Administration, which you just heard the annual unmet transit needs. We also have our implementation of Freeway Service Patrol, and then we also are the administrator for the South Placer Regional Transportation Authority and the Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services Agency. Celia mentioned we had an updated staffing plan adopted in October, and so we will be looking to hire a new assistant planner and, associate planner and assistant planner, and that will bring us to 7 1/4 full-time equivalent staff. And then on the budget, we have 24 different funding sources, and the total budget is about $4.7 million. About 56% of that is through reimbursable work and grants. And as you'll see in the document, the budget does balance. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I have none.
Any questions from the audience? Seeing none, I'll entertain.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, motion carries. Highway 65 widening Phase 1 project contract award. Who do we get?
I have this item also.
I thought so.
So in December, the board did recommend a preferred alternative for the Highway 65 widening project. And key improvements included in that project is to widen Highway 65 to 6 lanes from Interstate 80 up to Blue Oaks Boulevard, and then also constructing auxiliary lanes between every interchange all the way to Lincoln. Of course, that overall project is estimated to cost $60 million, and we currently don't have that much funding available. So we've been looking at a strategy to phase the project and construct a 3rd lane on southbound Highway 65 between Blue Oaks Boulevard and Galleria Boulevard, Stanford Ranch Road. And so if we move forward and complete design for phase 1, that will help us to create a shelf-ready project and be competitive for available grants. So we actually released a request for proposals for the phase 1 design in November of last year. We sent that to over 70 consulting firms, and we received 4 proposals. And those proposals were evaluated by staff from Rockland, Roseville, Caltrans, and PCTPA. And CH2M was selected as the top consultant based on their project understanding, their engineering expertise, and their proposed project management. And so staff is requesting board authorization to negotiate and sign a consultant contract not to exceed $1 million with CH2M. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Questions from the audience? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion. Been moved in second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thanks for your work on that. Okay, so Executive Director's report.
Yes, I have a couple of items for the board. First of all is a reminder to the board that we have scheduled interviews for executive director candidates for March the 21st. From 9 to 2, we'll provide you lunch. Hopefully, we'll be done earlier than that, but we wanted you to block out your calendar for that amount of time. The application period was supposed to close on Monday. It has been extended through Thursday to allow for additional candidates that have kind of on a last minute have been identified. So we're hoping to give you some good choices that you'll see on March 21st. I don't have the total. I'm meeting with the recruiter this afternoon to go over the applications that have come in. But I believe there's probably been about 8, maybe 10, something like that. It's been a challenge. I mean, to be quite honest, this position is very specialized, and there are not a lot of people who have the background, the abilities, and so on. And so, much like in the first round of recruitment, the second round has also been a challenge. But I'm optimistic. So I'll leave it at that. But I do want to make sure that everybody's still got March 21st on their calendar, because that's going to be important. And speaking,
Excuse me. Are you saying that potentially there could be 9 to 11 that will be at this meeting?
oh no.
Thank you.
Oh no. We'll narrow it down. I'm thinking no more than 3.
I thought that since, I was going to agree with that since we do have a qualified person for this highly qualified required position in place, that some of that could occur. Yeah.
Moving on. And I did want to remind the board that we are combining our March and April board meetings. We will be meeting on April the 11th at 9 a.m., and that will be in the Planning Commission meeting room or hearing room. That's up at CDRA at DeWitt Center. And so just a reminder of that, put that on your calendar. Is that at 9 o'clock? That will be at 9 o'clock, yes.
And I will be on a business trip, so I won't be here. So,
It turns out we have a vice chair.
yeah.
So,
I know.
Steve?
You'll be
Okay.
here. Do we have a quorum? Because you'll be out of town too, right? So you have two of us gone.
That still leaves us with a quorum.
Perfect, okay.
Especially if your alternates can join us.
Oh, that's right, yeah. Okay,
Okay, and that completes my report.
thank you. Any board direction to the staff? Seeing none? Informational items are in item on, N, I could do this. I have a cloudy mind right now. Next regular meeting is April 11th. We'll see you all then. This meeting is adjourned. Oh, my goodness.
Good job.
Wow,
Got a lot
let's
done
go.
in 35 minutes.